Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sure we'll have a few more people scrolling in here as the event progresses. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Trevor Freeman, and I'm the Public Programs Director here at the Western North Carolina Historical Association. And we're based out of the Smith McDowell House, the building you see in this photo behind me. We are a nonprofit historical organization. For anybody that doesn't know us, we cover the 23 Western counties of North Carolina and try to bring you a range of programming about them, about the people that live here, the historic places and the people, everything that makes up our cultural legacy of Western North Carolina. Tonight, I'm really excited to bring you this program called Shiloh Past and Present. And we have two speakers tonight, two residents of Shiloh. And we also have a special moderator with us tonight, Jefferson Ellison of Jawbreaking Creative. I'll give you a few little housekeeping tidbits before we get going. We will have plenty of time for questions throughout this event, so feel free to use the question and answer, that Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen throughout the event if you do happen to have any questions, and we'll get to those either in the presentation or at the end of the speakers' presentations. Also, if you do miss anything, if you want to watch this again, this will be recorded and it will be available on our website within just a few days. You've registered for the event, so you'll get the email sending you the link to that. And I'll also send out a survey if you want to tell us about your experience. So we welcome that feedback. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jefferson Ellison after I introduce him. So Jefferson is the principal and editor of the Jawbreaking Creative. They're a marketing, storytelling, and creative agency based here in Asheville. And Jefferson is an excellent moderator. I've seen his work in other places before, and I'm really excited to bring him to you tonight. So, Jefferson.
Thank you for that. I'm really pumped about this and really excited to introduce both Anita and Ria. So Anita White Carter is a native of Asheville and the Shiloh community, a graduate of Allen High School, Bennett College, and the University of Pittsburgh. She's a retired librarian from WNCHA. An active member of the community, she established the Shiloh Little Free Library that's located in the Shiloh Community Garden and is currently researching the history of the neighborhood. And so we'll hear from Anita first, and then we'll hear from Ria, who is also a native of Asheville and a former collegiate All-American basketball player, director, writer, author, screen, and playwright. She hails from the Shiloh community and she claims that it has heavily influenced the story she tells. In 2017, Maria released her memoir, Lost in a Game, The Road to Self-Discovery, which details her collegiate journey as a Black athlete with little to no self-identity, navigating the trials and the tribulations of collegiate basketball at a PWI. For those of you who don't know, that's a predominantly white institution. Maria has taken her story all over the Southeast during speaking engagements at multiple colleges and universities and high schools. She made her stage and directorial debut in Transition, which is her last extension of her 2017 memoir in December of 2020, followed by her directorial debut of The Power of Our Village, which was a short that debuted in February of 2021. So like I said, we're really excited to have both of these speakers here with us tonight. I believe we're gonna start, Anita, with you first, and then we'll transition right into Ria, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thanks a lot. I did grow up, I did grow up in Shiloh, and I lived away for many years, but I always had very fond memories of my time in Shiloh, and I decided to return to raise my son in a community surrounded with lots and lots of relatives. So I'm happy to be here with you tonight. And if you can allow me to share my screen, I have a slide presentation.
Okay, bear with me for one moment here.
Okay.
Okay, you should be good to go.
Okay. Should I click on all panelists here, or is that for you to do?
If you should be a co-host now, you should be able to share from that, but I have it pulled up also if you want me to scroll through it.
No, I really would like to share the screen because I've made some changes in in the one that I sent to you.
Okay.
But if not, we can. Okay, is that it? Okay.
Yeah, I'm still not seeing the screen share.
I'm gonna pop and see if it comes up. Here it comes. There it is. Is that it? Are you seeing that?
No, I'm not seeing that. When you share the screen option, do you see your PowerPoint on there?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I'll click on it. Did it come up?
There we go.
Okay, let's start from the beginning then. Okay. Now, do you see it?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. On my screen, I have something over here in the corner, but I hope you're seeing a full screen. Are you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Shiloh, this presentation will look at Shiloh from its early beginnings through the middle years, and then focus at the end on what's happening in Shiloh today. Shiloh is a historic African-American community established in its current location. I'm not seeing my full screen. Let me go back. In its current location in 1889. And many of the long-term residents are related, and their ancestors came from Old Biltmore, Old Shiloh, which was originally located on the present Biltmore estate. There are generations of these families still living in the community. Today, Shiloh is more racially and economically diverse, with low income to middle class working residents. This is a map of the Shiloh area. For those of you who are not familiar with the area, it's located between Hendersonville Road and Caribou Road in South Asheville. And these little black dots outline the current, or the core of Shiloh. And this is the area where some of the original inhabitants resided. After the Civil War, African-American freedmen settled in a small parcel of land that is now part of the Biltmore estate, and they call their community Shiloh. When George Vanderbilt purchased the estate property, he also purchased a small parcel of land where the people of Shiloh lived. His agent, Charles McNamee, and Reverend Billy Logan, a resident, helped relocate the people to the current community in South Asheville. With the exception of one resident who refused to sell until 1907, the relocation was a mutually agreed upon transaction. As I said, residents referred to the original community as Old Shiloh and the new location as New Shiloh. This is a photo from the Asheville Citizen-Times of the Collins cabin. For a number of years, Charles Collins, a resident in Old Shiloh, refused to sell his cabin and an adjoining tract of land. The cabin was located about a half mile from the estate mansion and remained there for several years after the mansion was completed. He finally sold to Vanderbilt in 1907. This is a photograph of a sign over on the Biltmore estate. This sign, erected in 2011, identifies the location of the old road in the Old Shiloh community. And this is a photo of the church in Old Shiloh. This is taken from Bill Alexander's Around Biltmore Village. And he says, George Vanderbilt purchased the church and the acre it stood on in September 1889 for $1,000, and the promise to build a new, larger and nicer church for the congregation, and to move their deceased to the new church cemetery. The new church, dedicated in May 1890, was not only larger and nicer, but was furnished with stained glass windows, pews, and a bell provided by Vanderbilt. I have yet to find a photo of that church. And I feel real bad about that, but I'm still looking. The old wooden building, formerly used as a church by the colored people and called Shiloh Church, was destroyed by fire Saturday night, and that was Saturday night in December 1890. The building was on the Vanderbilt property and was about 3 miles south of Asheville. After the original church burned, Vanderbilt gave the people another abandoned church that was on the Biltmore estate property. The residents moved that church to New Shiloh. This is a photo of the Reverend Billy Logan. Reverend Logan helped relocate the people of Old Shiloh. He was a trustee and the church secretary. He directed the construction of the new church and the removal of graves to the new location. Many of his descendants still live in the area. In fact, this photo was given to me by his great-great-granddaughter. New Shiloh was a rural area with dirt roads, and small family farms. The earliest inhabitants lived along West Chapel Road, White Avenue, Shiloh Road, and Brooklyn Road. Rock Hill and Petersburg, nearby African-American neighborhoods, were already established at the time residents from Old Shiloh moved into the area. New Shiloh grew and prospered around 3 essential community foundations: the churches, the school, and the people. This is a photo of the church that replaced the church that was moved to New Shiloh in 1889. This photo shows the Reverend Spalding, who was pastor in the early years. And if you look in the left background here, you'll see the Shiloh Elementary School, which was built in 1927. Here's a current photo of the church that was dedicated in 1928. Notice that we've updated the church so that we now have a handicap ramp. Here is the Brooklyn Mission Fire Baptized Holiness Church. This church, established in 1917, played a very important role in the development of the fledgling community. The church was built on Brooklyn Road, one of the main roads in Shiloh. This church is still in use today and only recently has been updated with new siding and a roof. New roof. Rock Hill Missionary Baptist Church. The first Rock Hill Missionary Baptist Church was established in the late 1800s in a small log building on Rock Hill Road. In 1925, the church was relocated to Caribou Road, known then as Possum Ridge. I love to say that, Possum Ridge. Here's a photograph of, a current photograph of the church. This building was rebuilt on the other side of Caribou Road in 1952. The church in Old Shiloh was also used as a school. When the church in New Shiloh was erected, children attended school in the church's basement. Later, don't have an exact date for that, a separate building was erected to house the school. That school burned in January 1897 and was replaced with a second structure. Mr. Vanderbilt provided financial support and a teacher for the school. Financial support from the school also came from a program that allowed Black estate workers who lived in Shiloh to have a portion of their pay automatically directed to the school. Those who did not have pay automatically directed were reminded by their supervisors to do so. The second school was a two-room wooden structure. This building was very inadequate. And for years, residents petitioned the County Board of Education for a new school. They started talking about it in the 1920s, and this article appeared in the paper explaining how inadequate the school was. In fact, it said at one point, if all the kids in Shiloh came to school, there would be standing room only. Finally, the county board approved the construction of a new Rosenwald School for Shiloh, which opened in September 1927. This school was built with public money and a grant from the Rosenwald Fund, founded by Julius Rosenwald, CEO of Sears, Roebuck and Company. Rosenwald teamed with Booker T. Washington, the country's preeminent African-American educator, to improve education for African Americans. Between 1913 and 1925, the Rosenwald Fund helped build more than 4,000 rural African American schools across the South. This school was the pride of Shiloh. The Rosenwald model required the buy-in of African American communities as well as support of white governing bodies. The Black community had to match the Rosenwald grant, and members of the community were tasked with constructing the school. By doing so, the Shiloh community members developed a strong sense of ownership in the school and the education of their children. Now think about the times, this was in the 1920s. So raising local Black money for Rosenwald schools was no simple task among poor neighborhoods, not just Shiloh, but there were lots of neighborhoods trying to do this. This particular school was constructed by Lucius Williams, a Black resident in Shiloh and builder. He was also very active as a school committeeman. The Rosenwald schools varied in design and size. Most were planned to incorporate key components. For example, windows needed to be aligned and larger to maximize sunlight because electricity was not always available in some communities. Shiloh was a larger school. It was built near the end of the building program. And of course, it had electricity. In 2002, the National Trust for Historic Preservation named Rosenwald schools near the top of the country's most endangered list of places and created a campaign to raise awareness and money for their preservation. Unfortunately, Shiloh was demolished in 1979, which is really a shame because it was a really nice school. Some of you may be aware of the particular restoration of the Rosenwald School in Mars Hill. In 1952, the county expanded the school. And from its beginnings, the school was the center of neighborhood social activities. It was a meeting place for clubs, athletic events, and theater productions. The original Rosenwald wing was demolished in 1979, but the expansion is still in use as part of the Linwood Crump Recreation Complex and continues to host community events. Shiloh was a community of strong and hardworking folks. In the early years, many residents worked as laborers on the Biltmore estate or as domestics in Biltmore Forest. Shiloh was also home to farmers, businessmen, dental and medical professionals, a funeral director, teachers, and ministers. This is a photo of one of those businesses. It's the Shiloh Food Center on Shiloh Road in the 1950s. Early Shiloh was a vital, self-sustaining area that had a number of local mom and pop businesses, which included grocery stores, in-home beauty shops, and laundry services. It also had a blacksmith shop, a golf course, a dry cleaners, and in later years, a Black-owned nursing home. The Shiloh Community League. The Community League was a prominent neighborhood organization. They lobbied for paved roads, street lights, and school improvements. The league also sponsored youth sports and scouting. In 1959, the league trustees purchased property on the corner of Century and Hampton Roads and erected a small building that functioned as a concession stand and gathering place for meetings, games, and other neighborhood events. After more than a decade of use, the building burned and the property remained vacant for many years. In 2002, the last remaining league trustee, Lawrence Wilson, deeded the property to the Shiloh Community Association for a community garden. This is a photo of one of the Little League teams taken in front of the school. Notice how long the windows are. And so they were very active in the community, the students, the team. Scouting was a major activity for Shiloh children during the 50s and 1960s. Troops were sponsored by the Community League and churches. And this is the little Girl Scout troop with my sister and the little Boy Scout troop with my brother. My parents were both very, very much involved in neighborhood scouting. And as I said before, there were, the folk in Shiloh were industrious and hardworking, but they also had time to play. It was not all work and no play in Shiloh. There was the Shiloh Recreation Park. E.W. Pearson, Secretary of the Buncombe County Negro Agricultural Fair Association, announced formal planning for a recreation park for Negroes, I'm taking this from the paper, in July 1932. The park was located on a 7-acre tract in the L.W. Williams, and that's referring to Lucius Williams, who built the Shiloh School, Shiloh Brooklyn subdivision. Plans included a baseball diamond and a small golf course. Hundreds attended the park opening in August 1932. Programs for the opening featured a baseball tournament, picnics, and entertainment by the Pullman Porters Band. There were also a few social clubs and juke joints scattered about the neighborhood. And I have heard some wonderful stories from some elders about some of those places. Neighborhood festivals and fish fries were frequent events. Many of these events were sponsored by the Community League as fundraising efforts to support the Boy Scouts. So that's a little bit about early Shiloh and Shiloh during the middle years. And I think of the middle years as those years during segregation, when the community was separate. But what's going on in Shiloh today? New Shiloh today. The Shiloh Community Association was established in 2000 and started the community garden in 2005. Here is a photo of the community garden and the pavilion, which was erected on that property donated by Lawrence Wilson. Here in this photo, you can see one of our little free libraries. There is another one. I think that's the one for children. There's another one for adults. And in the back, there is the pavilion, which was built by Mars Hill students, some students working for Mars Hill. So it's it's a very popular place in the neighborhood. So, activism in Shiloh. So what's going on in terms of activism in Shiloh? The Shiloh Community Association spearheads community activism. And this is a list of, this is the vision of that group. Its vision includes cooperative relationships among residents, property owners, and businesses in the community, harmonious growth and development of the community, health, educational, and recreational programs for the community. And one of my favorite and one active program is the Shiloh Community Scholarship Program. The association has established an endowment with the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina so that we give scholarships to students who reside in the area. So far, we've given 4 scholarships to kids going off to college. The vision also includes quality housing development in the community, good citizenship among and by residents. Building on our motto, which is building the legacy and embracing the future, Shiloh seeks to find ways to ensure the preservation of Shiloh's historic identity while acknowledging and respecting the reality of change. The expanded role of the association includes being able to work with other neighborhoods to ensure all are safe and effectively meeting the needs of its citizens, be active in city government through collaboration with governing bodies and surrounding resources. Much of the funding from the community, for the community association, comes from grants. Our primary grant is the Isaac Coleman Economic Community Investment, which provides grants to nonprofits working toward racial justice. We have the E.W. Pearson Project Collaborative, which is funded by the Coleman Grant. And it includes the African American communities of Shiloh, Burton Street, and East End, and Project Lighten Up, which is an after-school and summer camp program based in the Rock Hill Missionary Baptist Church. Some activities and outcomes from the collaborative. The collaborative supports community improvement projects, programming, and engagement activities. It assists in developing community development plans. Shiloh has a community development plan and is working with the other communities on helping them to develop a plan. It works to obtain 501c3 status for community associations. Again, Shiloh has had that status for several years and is working with the other communities to obtain that status. The collaborative funded historic markers in the neighborhood. It gives communities the opportunity to identify their needs and exchange ideas. And they do this in numerous meetings and discussions about what's going on in the neighborhood. How can we help? How can we help one another? It helps community associations develop effective communication strategies with city and county agencies. Some of the, I need to be careful of my time, but some of the engagement activities are designed to bring the community members together and to foster a sense of community cohesion. Some of these engagement activities include History Day, a gathering to celebrate the history of the neighborhood. We usually do that in the fall. Everything's changed since COVID, but Storytelling Day, which is a fun activity for children and adults. We have a July celebration, which is another fun gathering activity that includes games and activities and free food. And many of these activities are also offered in partnership with the Community Center, Parks and Recreation. There is a Christmas celebration. And there is a Black History program in February, which we contribute to, which is really funded by Parks and Recreation. Some of the improvement projects include garden maintenance, including the development of a heritage trail, which is a little trail that runs along the garden beside a beautiful little creek. Property for that trail was donated to us by Habitat for Humanity, property for the trail and where the creek runs. Also, students from Project Lighten Up planted an orchard over near the community garden, near that trail. And we also have, in terms of green space, we also have had deeded to us a small piece of property over off of Caribou Road, which is right now completely undeveloped. So we think of it as a bird sanctuary where there are butterflies and birds, but we have to call it something. But in the future, we expect it to be a space for a resource center in the neighborhood. Here's a list of some of our partners and collaborators. I'm not going to read the list, but I would point out that we have students from Warren Wilson College and UNCA who do service learning projects in the center. BIPA, the Asheville Buncombe Institute for Parity Achievement, works closely with us and comes to the community association meetings to give health information. In fact, they always have a health moment in the community association meeting. And all of the other ones, we're really happy with so many of our volunteers. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but the Rotary in Biltmore Park did a lot of work in the garden with mulching the area. Then there are volunteers who come and work in the garden often. So what's one of the major issues facing Shiloh today? It's revitalization versus, or as opposed to, gentrification and affordable housing. Revitalization means investing in the existing neighborhood, reinforcing social networks, neighborhood services, and local businesses. In contrast, in gentrifying neighborhoods, the community transitions to an exclusive community, inaccessible to those who call it home. Now, gentrification is a controversial and divisive issue, and it's a sore point among traditional residents in Shiloh. The term is often intermixed with efforts to revitalize the physical environment and social networks of the neighborhood. Many of the traditional residents fear that they may be eventually displaced by newer residents who are buying some of the more expensive houses that are being built seemingly on every little spare piece of property that can be found. Some of the community association is working in collaboration with a number of groups and the city to revitalize the area and resist the pressures of gentrification. Some other community concerns around the issue include increased infill housing and development, higher prices for the new homes, increased assessment of home values and property tax. That's been a big issue in recent months. The character of the neighborhood is changing. The population is increasing along with an increase in residential density. And again, there is concern about possible future displacement of current lower income inhabitants. Fortunately, Shiloh is zoned as residential with the largest majority of homes devoted to single family units. Newer houses are built as single family units, but with increasing density. Developers are purchasing single home lots and subdividing them so that a lot that once held one house may now have 2, 3, and in some cases more. And some of this is happening because the sale to developers is happening because when some of the old time homeowners die out, their children or heirs who no longer live in the area are selling property to these developers. Some of the additional concerns include an uptick in crime and drug activity, jobs or lack thereof, and economic security, youth engagement, and commercial encroachment. Most commercial operations are on the periphery of Shiloh along Caribou Road and Hendersonville Roads. Shiloh is in easy reach of these operations, so there's really no need to put retail shops inside of the Shiloh core. The association is fighting against efforts of businesses that are seeking conditional commercial zoning in the Shiloh core. Youth engagement. We are really trying to focus on the youth in the neighborhood so that they will come to love the neighborhood like so many of the old timers do. And Shiloh has established a community garden stipend program for neighborhood youth. Participants learn about food production, stream ecology, neighborhood history, financial literacy, and ways to improve their writing skills. They write reports about much of what they do in the garden. And they also distribute produce to members of the community. Project Lighten Up is an after-school program and summer day camp that blends education and recreation into daily activities. During the summer, campers focus on reading and math skills. Team Us is an initiative led by a group of current and former residents. Their goal is to expand the horizons of area teens and expose them to the broader culture and history of African Americans. They raise money for field trips to Black colleges and Black History Museum. Next summer, they're off to Washington to tour the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And this team, I cannot say how much I love, appreciate, and how proud I am of this group of young people. And I say young people because they're younger than I am. Most of them are like 40s and 50s. And not all of them actually live in Shiloh. The president actually lives in Charlotte. But they come together and they work really hard so that they can provide resources for the kids in the neighborhood. These trips are free or at very low cost for the trip. This document has been extremely useful in helping the association's revitalization efforts and in monitoring new construction in the area. It's the Shiloh Community Plan 2025. And boy, are we approaching that quickly. It's a partnership of the Shiloh Community Association Neighborhood Housing and the City of Asheville. It's a blueprint for the evolution of the neighborhood for years to come. Partners began working on the plan in 2002. The plan was adopted by the Asheville City Council as an addendum to the city's official comprehensive plan on December 2010. Here are some of the goals and issues addressed in the plan. And the plan focuses on neighborhood revitalization. Quality of life goals center around working to improve the livability of the neighborhood, especially housing and safety. The plan incorporates a number of goals related to land use, protect and complement the existing character of Shiloh, maintain the residential character of the neighborhood, maintain and develop opportunities for green space, provide assistance for affordable housing and home improvement, and improve the infrastructure of the community. The plan has stipulations that address housing construction in the Shiloh core area. The plan requires development to incorporate architectural features that are characteristic of the historic building patterns, such as front porches, pitched roofs, dwellings that are oriented toward the street. And usually, before a developer submits site plans to the city's technical review committee, they meet with the association to discuss the plans. And if the association feels that these developers are not meeting the guidelines laid out in the 2025 plan, they will protest, or they will complain to the technical review committee and to the city. There are recreation activities, of course, in Shiloh. This is the Linwood Crump Community Center, which was named for community activist Linwood Crump, who was lovingly known as the mayor of Shiloh. He was active with the youth and had no compulsion not to go to City Hall. He would run to City Hall if there was ever a problem in the neighborhood. This is the current Shiloh Park, which is under the auspices of Parks and Recreation. And you can see some of the things that we have there. There's a brand new children's playground with exercise equipment for adults. These are a few of the historic markers. This is the gateway marker that's near the church as you enter Shiloh on Shiloh Road from Hendersonville Road. There is one for the Holiness Church, the school, and another one for the Young's Nursing Home, which was one of the first Black-owned nursing homes in the area. The sense of community remains strong among the people of New Shiloh. Each year from 2013 to 2019, Shiloh received the Community of Promise Award given by Western North Carolina Communities, a nonprofit organization that supports the economic development efforts of communities throughout the mountains to improve the quality of life of their residents. Here is a photo of one of the little Shiloh communities. I think this is Howland Meadows. And here's a photo of the nurse from Ambippa working with members of the community. I'm not sure what she's doing, but she often comes and gives information about health issues. That's it. For additional information about Shiloh, you can see the City of Asheville neighborhood profile, our website. Check us out on Facebook. And also on Facebook, check out Project Lighten Up Summer Day Camp. I want to thank Sophie Dixon and Norma Baines for their assistance in the preparation of this presentation. Sophie is the president, and Norma is the assistant liaison. That's it. So I will entertain questions whenever it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. That was amazing. We've gotten some questions in, and we're going to hold those to the end. So we will open it up to Rita.
Can I get rid of my screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if you click in share, it should take care of that.
Oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, okay. Up here, I see.
Well, I think I can do it from
I
my
see
control.
stop share. Is that it? Okay. All right.
Well, first of all, Miss Anita, I just want to thank you for that amazing presentation, bringing all of the history and everything into tonight. The pride and the sense of pride that you have growing up in Shiloh stems directly from that. There's no way that you can grow up in that lineage and not take some type of pride and cultivate some type of, so just having a sense of invincibility to really take on the world, because this is the place that you come from. So just a short description of myself. I was born and raised in Asheville, grew up in the Shiloh community. My grandmother has lived in her home on Shiloh Road for over 50 years. That's the home that my mother, my aunts and uncles grew up in. I subsequently grew up in. I traveled and played with my friends and grew up along the same streets that Miss Anita was talking about. My aunts and uncles actually attended Shiloh School, and just being able to grow up in this community has been, one of the biggest blessings of my life. I played basketball at TC Robertson, and I had a basketball scholarship to Limestone University after that. And once I graduated in 2014, I moved back to the community just to kind of be more active. And I just felt like my calling was here back home. I was actually a part of Team Us for about 2 or 3 years prior to my, prior to my creative career taking off. And I still work closely with them to bring certain activities and certain programs to the youth, and trying to educate them on where we come from and the power that exists here in Shiloh. So as far as the film is concerned, in February of this year, I released my first short film entitled The Power of Our Village. And as Miss Anita spoke about, during February, there's a lot of different Black History Month programs that go on in Shiloh. There's a lot of different activities that bring the community out, but due to COVID, that wasn't possible this year. And I was just trying to figure out a way that I could pay homage and show my appreciation for the area that made me. And so I had the idea to make a short film to where it captured some of the community staples and some of the lots that are either now abandoned or developed from spaces that used to be old family homes or community staples. And I wrote a spoken word piece to kind of serve as the backdrop. And the young man who is the actor in the film is my younger cousin, who I'm trying to, remind him and teach him of the things that were passed down to me, as far as what it means and the responsibility that you have in coming from Shiloh. So you'll see in the film certain community staples, and I didn't know when I made it that my film would hold one of the last images of Haynes grocery store.
Yes.
Before it was demolished. It was demolished shortly after that. And that is just a sign of a ever-changing neighborhood. I never thought that I would be able to pass that corner and not see that. And it's going to be even crazier passing that and seeing however many homes they decide to put there. So the point of the power of our village is to show everyone that regardless of how you change Shiloh, the imagery of it and what it looks like, you can never take away the pride and the power that's been cultivated from the people. A lot of my work is based in faith, tribe, and fellowship. And that's the direct lineage of what Shiloh was founded on, which is the schools, the churches, and the people. It's just, it takes a different face and a different generation, but it's ultimately the same thing. So I think Trevor is gonna screen The Power of Our Village. It's about, I think, 2.5 minutes, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And then I'll be looking forward to answering some questions about it afterwards. Created in the 1880s as our haven of serenity, built with the intention to educate in faith, pride, and humility, defining a true freedom and dignity while taking our ownership and protecting the essence of our tribe. That's the nativity in which created thee, not some watered down image of what they thought Shiloh should be. Time. It simply continues the progression of all existence. Familiarities become former as tribes transition. homes vacated, land dismissive. Our spaces become blended, if only they didn't lack sympathetic intention. Their very prevalence is a misguided entitlement, inhabiting areas not sent for them. With that same entitlement empowering attempted regulation in misunderstood cultural celebrations. See, the powers may walk too far ahead, but we cling to our value community. With the lineage of our ancestors, we combat the removal of our assemblance with the might of our people. This is simply your reminder of the product that made me. The brokenness of mistakes redeemed. Survival is preserving in the midst of evolution, transcending reinvention while upholding Shiloh power. We have created our own roadmap to sustain us on this journey. Time and again, we adjust to maintain. Things may deplete us, but we always repurpose and growth. Though the picture fades, the people will make sure that we are all okay. They can snatch the image, but not the depths of what we carry inside. Nativity's heartbeat is the one thing that's never out of time.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
That was so fantastic. And Anita, it was so great to hear you tell your story and go over the history of Shiloh. So I want to thank you both for doing that. There are a series of questions here. I have a few questions I'd like to ask. I want to open up to the floor. And I kind of want to just kind of set the tone. So, holding space for the city we live in and the nature of conversations like this. I know there are a lot of white people on this call. So all the white people in the room, just take a breath. And we all just kind of like, let's let some of the air out of the room with this conversation, right? I think let's just all breathe and process what we've just witnessed and what we've kind of discussed. I think the nature of these sort of conversations bring up a lot of different emotions. When you start seeing how neighborhoods change and how communities progress and their influence and impacted by different things, you start to ask yourself, what role in that did I play? Am I a gentrifier? All these different questions. So I want everybody to kind of just take a second and let's just take a step back. And also I wanted to being a native of Asheville myself, I wanted to remind people that when we're having conversations about Black neighborhoods and Black legacies, that we're talking about two different things, right? One, we're talking about the history of a people, right? And the history of Blackness in Asheville and in this area. But in a lot of the things that what Anita was talking about, essentially the Shiloh Community Association is acting like an HOA, right? A lot of neighborhoods, have organizations that come together and preserve certain things. And I want to, going through some of the questions that I saw, I want to remind everyone that a lot of things that what the association is doing is not what makes Shiloh special, because every community does that. Every community that has buy-in into their legacy makes sure the grass is cut, that the neighbors are happy, and those sort of things. And
Absolutely.
So I sometimes I worry that the Black narrative gets caught up in pain and trauma, and they think that we have to do certain things because we're worried that our neighbors are going to burn the house down. And it's no, beautiful communities have HOAs. And so the Shiloh Community Association is nothing more than an HOA. And so then there's the legacy of Blackness and the protection of Black spaces in a city like Asheville that is becoming so white. And that is a different conversation. And so what I kind of wanted to open with, I kind of want to open with you, Rhea. There was this line in your piece where you said survival is preserving in the midst of evolution.
Mhm.
And so I want to like start there. Like what, sitting here being a grown person with a legacy in Shiloh, and then traveled as you have and processing your identity as you have, and then hearing Anita kind of walk through the history of Shiloh, what does that look like? What comes up for you when you're thinking about surviving and evolution? Like, what does that feel like, and what does that look like for you?
Well, for me, it's preserving the legacy that our ancestors and the elders have built, right? Because they've ultimately laid the foundation to take us forward. Once they transition, it's up to us, the younger generation, to continue to preserve the things that make Shiloh special, which is the people and the things that we own and that we've built. So when I say survival in the midst of evolution, survival and perseverance go hand in hand for me. And then in the midst of evolution is time, the way that the community has evolved. I've only moved back here since 2014, and Shiloh has changed so much in 7 years. So just being able to continue to move forward with the foundation that our ancestors have laid, and then us as young people, we have the responsibility to educate ourselves and use the resources that they've left us, because it's we have to pick up that burden, because it's education and resources out here, and it's no reason why we can't continue to keep the torch, take the torch from them, and keep these things going in the way that we see fit, and how in the midst of the evolution as we grow and as we continue to move forward. So that's kind of what the basis of that line came from.
Yeah, I love that. And Anita, going off what Rhea is saying, would you kind of agree that, at its core, Shiloh is a grouping of houses, but it's the nature of community. It is the necessity that the Black community has had, because the world itself has not provided these resources, and so we've had to provide them to ourselves. That the legacy of Shiloh is essentially just the legacy of Black people, and it becomes anchored in a neighborhood, because in a city like Asheville that is so white, we're just surprised that so many Black people exist in one place.
Yes, I very much agree with what Rhea is saying. I was talking with a friend of mine last night who grew up in Shiloh, who is a descendant of the Reverend Billy Logan. And she was saying to me, she was really concerned about Shiloh, as I am, because she said, our great-grandchildren won't know that it was one time a thriving, self-sustaining Black neighborhood, which is important to us in terms of our history. And you're right, it's more than houses. It's a feeling of community that I feel very much drawn to, because I am I've been around a long time in the neighborhood, and I have seen it change a lot. And the change is different. It's not better or it's not worse. It's just different. Having grown up here in the 50s and 60s, when it was a segregated neighborhood, there was a different feel. And like you said, it's more than houses. It was a feel of community where it was like a village. It was like a village, and everyone knew who you were. You didn't have to worry about locking your doors. It was just a really comforting place. And even though many of us were poor, I certainly was among the poor. I never felt poor. I never felt disadvantaged. I really felt quite happy in the neighborhood. So, I would agree that it is something that we have to hold on to. And that's one of the things, that sense of community is something we have to hold on to. And it's one of the things we really want to push among our young people. And Rhea, I didn't know you were a member of Team Us. That's a great group. And they are really trying to mentor the youth and develop this sense of pride in Shiloh and having grown up in Shiloh.
So that's kind of it's a great transition to a question that came up a lot in here. And I'm going to pair that with a question that I had, because I want to make sure we get to some of these community questions as well. And so I think with this conversation and the perspective I'm coming into it with, I think so much about the idea that Tavis Smiley, who's a Black academic, he says, you know, Black people did best in segregation. He's like, if you look at the numbers, education, home ownership, entrepreneurship was best because we had no option, right? And that is, and you know, and depending on how you fall in a Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois conversation, you would agree with him, right? But I think the second part of that comes to this question around like Black Wall Street, right? There are 3 or 4 people in this chat who have asked, were the churches and the schools burnt down, or did they just have an accidental fire? And then I have the same question about all the glorious facts about William Vanderbilt or the Vanderbilt family that happened to come from the Vanderbilt family. Like, are we sure he gave this church, this beautiful church with stained glass windows that we don't have pictures of? Like, there's so much, no one's trusting all this information.
Okay, let me respond to that particular question about did he give the church that we have no pictures of. The Reverend Billy Logan was the person who helped move the people to the church. His daughter, Annie Logan Owens, gave an interview, an oral interview, which was actually published in the newspaper as a part of our church history. And she refers to that, and she talks about it. So I do believe it existed. And in terms of giving them the church, when Vanderbilt bought the old church property for $1,000, his agent maintained control over that money. And that was some of the money that was used to rebuild the church. There's this question going on around in the neighborhood. Well, what happened to the stained glass windows? Where are they? And we're trying to find that out. But I really would, I do believe the church, I know the church existed. And I have no reason to doubt Miss Annie Owens, of all people in this world. So.
That's awesome. I think, you know, and I think it's part of this conversation, you know, we talked earlier before, part of moderating these sort of conversations is just kind of, you know, being honest. And it's like, you know, I don't always trust the things in the history book, so I like to ask. Mm-hmm. But do we know if the fires, there was a lot of fires mentioned.
Well, there were a lot of wooden buildings too.
Sure. Yep.
And remember, a lot of these buildings, I cannot respond to whether they were deliberately burned, what happened, or what the accidents happened. I have no knowledge of that, and have not been able to find out. Sure. But do remember that they were poor wooden buildings. They were heated in some cases with the, you know, these old wooden stoves. So I cannot respond to that. I don't know whether they were.
And Rhea, kind of piggybacking off of that, as someone who is making it your life's work at this point to kind of preserve the legacy of Shiloh and, you know, the Black community and the history of that in a city like Asheville, what are your thoughts on that notion that segregation was good for Black entrepreneurship and Black communities?
I think he makes a very interesting point, because I think if you look at Black people in the history of us in this country, and you take all of these beautiful people from a land that's so vast, and you strip them of everything: identity, customs, culture, language. And then you put them through 400 years of slavery, a war. You free them with no education, nowhere to go, no means of income. Yet we take all of that, and because we don't have any options, the only thing we can do is take up that burden and that will and that want to have a better life, go get what we came for, go get what we deserve, and build our own. And you take the plethora of Black Wall Street. A lot of people, when you say Black Wall Street, they only think of Tulsa, but there were hundreds of cities who had Black Wall Streets. And you look at everything that they were able to do with little to nothing. And then you look at when desegregation came, the intent behind desegregation is what the issue has always been. Because it doesn't matter whether you segregate people, whether you desegregate people when your intent is harming. Your intent is to harm them ultimately by the systematic issues, policies, and policies that you put in place. So yes, we were desegregated. Yes, there were things like the Voting Rights Act. There were things that came out of that pushed us forward. But at the end of the day, as soon as we got in the door, they pulled the rug out from under us. So he makes a very, very interesting point, the more that you think about it. But I think that's where I don't want the history and the feeling of Shiloh to get lost, and the history and the feeling of the Black experience to get lost. Because yes, we have trauma, that goes without saying. But on the other side of that trauma, we have joy. We have things that we built. We have the power, we have the excellence. But it's upon us to tap into that feeling, if that makes sense.
That was really well said. And that's something that I think a lot of young Black people in the last 2 years, we keep thinking about, right? It's like, I'm so tired of talking about the opportunity gap, and I'm so tired of talking about mass incarceration. I want to talk about Tressie McMillan Cotton and Toni Morrison. I want to talk about the legacy of the Black church and the joy that it brings, and not just the idea that it existed as a way for the Underground Railroad. But that's a different conversation. I do think one thing that when you said that came up is so much of this conversation and the notion of doing this, the idea that there are 100 people on here wanting to hear about the history of a neighborhood that they don't live in, assuming majority of you, is because it is such a shocking thing. We're like, in a city that's 8% Black, why are there so many Black people owning homes and having, for all intents and purposes, the beginning of generational wealth, because they're inheriting land, right?
Right.
And Anita, would you say, it's a two-part question. Someone asked, they want to know your fondest memory, and I would like to know that too. Some of your fondest memories from growing up in Shiloh. But would you also say that part of the need to protect the Shiloh community is because you have seen in your life as a retired librarian and a woman with multiple degrees that that buy-in, that agency, that idea of self-respect that maybe the world was not instilling in you, but your community did, was how you were able to grow in your life?
Yes, I very much think so. When I was growing up in Shiloh, it was a segregated community. So I'm interested in that previous statement. But anyway, there was buy-in, and there was this feeling that, I don't know if I should say this, but there was this feeling that you had to do better just to get ahead. And
That's still there.
It's half as much. Go ahead and say it.
Yeah, you really had to do better, and that was really drilled into us when we were coming up at that time. But as the neighborhood became desegregated, it's important, and kids went to schools where there was not a lot of, first of all, there were not a lot of them in the classes. And there was not a lot of discussion about growing forth as a Black person in these schools. So yes, I agree that it is extremely important that we maintain, or at least in a city that, as you said, is mostly white, that it shouldn't be a surprise, but it is a surprise to many people about Shiloh. And I was really happy that Rhea did capture that store, that when it first, that building, it was one of the main businesses in Shiloh. At first, of course, it was operated by whites, but eventually she referred to it as Haynes Store because she's younger than I am. It was purchased by a Black person, Mr. Haynes, and he kept it for many years. And then his wife had a beauty shop in it. So again, I do believe that in a time when we are so concerned about what's happening to our lives as African Americans, that this legacy remain available to everyone, not just to our children. And you were asking me about some of my fondest memories.
Yes, ma'am.
I have so many. Some of my fondest memories center around the school. In 2000, I'm gonna mess up the year, I think 2010, we had a school reunion where people came from all over the country back to share their memories of the school. And many of mine center around that school. I remember certain teachers who would bring in information about Black history. Now you remember that during that time, the school, North Carolina school curriculum did not discuss Black history. So we had these Black teachers who would bring in issues of the Crisis magazine. And, but my fondest memory during that time was learning about Black poetry. That was Black literature, and poetry was really important. I think I still remember many of the poems. We would have poetry contests, and there was one contest that was always available in the school where everyone would practice to see how well they could say the creation. It was actually a contest to see who could best do the creation. So I remember those were some of my fondest memories. And of course, scouting. Scouting was really a great activity for me, my family. My father and mother were very much involved in scouting, and I had a photo at one time where every member of the family had on a different scouting uniform. I was in Girl Scouts, my little sister was in Brownies, my mother was in Den Mother, my dad was in Boy Scouts, and my brothers were too. So, but just being able to share and to be a part of a community where you felt so loved. I always felt so loved in Shiloh.
That's gonna make me cry. Because I think, so if you know what, most people out here don't know me, but the reason I'm here is because I teach a webinar on anti-racism marketing. And part of that conversation is a lot of times when we have conversations with Black people, we put them on stage, we're forgetting that everyone is just human, and everyone just wants to feel seen, heard, and validated. Everybody just wants to know that they're supported and to feel loved. And the power of that is life changing, and it is culture shifting. And I think one of the things, I hate this is recorded because I made a face. One of the things that I hate around the narrative around Black neighborhoods is that we always have to talk about, we're worried about crime, and how now it's the Black elders who are trying to prevent crime, even though that's not a symptom of Blackness. That is a symptom of the world that Black people are living in, and the government isn't helping them. And so now we have to help them because they don't have that agency. And I love that you can, really deduce, your entire life to reciting poetry. That's so pure and that's so beautiful. And I think it's really nice for you, for Rhea to see that, to hear that too, especially as as a young filmmaker, as a young artist, you obviously know the power of art and what it can do. And so I'm curious what making that piece was like for you.
It was literally like, it's kind of hard to describe, because it's like it kind of put me back in the place when I was in college, and being on a basketball team and being on scholarship. You're around them more than you're around your own family. And it gets to the point where everything that my teammates do is getting on my nerves, or I'm struggling in school, or like I just don't want to be here. But just being close enough and being able to take a weekend just to come home and be in Shiloh and just go to the center and see the counselors that still work at the community center that was there when I was in elementary school, or going to sit on the porch with my elders, talking to my friends that still lived in the neighborhood and are now working for the city and different things. It's like just being able to come home and feel that love, and just be able to feel that somebody look at you and say, I don't know what you're going through. You're not really talking about it, but I know you're gonna be all right. That that right there is that's something that you can't describe, especially being a person of color in this country, going and being in the situation that I was in, where I'm at a predominantly white college. The only other people on the campus that look like me are my teammates in the boys basketball team and the track team. So it's like I'm trying to navigate that world, but then just knowing that you're home as soon as I pull up at my grandmother's house, none of that matters. So that was the feeling that I had making the power of our village.
I love that. And I apologize. I literally had to just take a second because I went to a PWI as well. And and I think one thing that's just coming up a lot for me in this conversation, and I think what I hope people take from this is that like the power of Black community is it's almost like the power of therapy, right? In a world where Black people going to PWIs don't see themselves, at some point you have to go home so you can get a reflection,
Right.
Going back to Anita's point about poetry, there is a poem by Audre Lorde called Poetry is Not a Luxury. And it's the idea that, like poetry doesn't have to rhyme. It doesn't have to be in your vernacular. It doesn't have to be mystical. It can just be you sitting on the porch with your friend, silent. That can be poetry. Poetry can validate you, and that's available to you. And I think one thing I'm so grateful for is to hear that Anita can trace, as a historian, she can trace the intent behind the Shiloh community, that they've always known that they needed that somebody needed to tell these people that they were seen, heard, and valid, and that you, a young person, felt that, that's what's powerful, and that's the power of community. We're wrapping up, so I want to get to some of these quicker questions. So I'll start here. Anita, do you know the nature behind the name Shiloh?
No, not really. It's from the Bible. There are lots of communities named Shiloh. It has a biblical reference.
Sure.
Yeah, the biblical reference is what I started with in the film. It's Shiloh is based from the peaceful one.
That's right. Yeah.
And will you repeat the streets that anchor Shiloh?
The early streets that anchor Shiloh are Shiloh Road, that comes off Hendersonville Road, West Chapel Road, that comes off London Road, and that was one of the first streets where some of the first houses were built, up to Caribou Road, and then back down Shiloh Road again. That's sort of the center of the core of the Shiloh area. But it's wider than that. It extends out toward Brooklyn. Well, it's not Brooklyn anymore because the I-40 messed that up. And also Rock Hill and Petersburg are now kind of lumped into Shiloh, and that's over on Rock Hill Road.
Awesome. I'm gonna task Trevor. I haven't been given that permission, but there are some few questions in here that I think are a little more logistical, like what the 501c3 could do for the community association, and questions about whether or not the Biltmore estate displaced some other communities. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I want to end kind of similar to where we started with both of you all. For everyone who's on this call, who's listened to the last hour and a half of this, if there was one thing you wanted them to take away from this conversation about Shiloh, what would that be? I'll start with you, Anita.
Well, the one thing I guess I would like for people to remember is that it was a neighborhood. First of all, it was a Black neighborhood, because there will be years when nobody will remember that it was a Black, I hope not, that it was a Black neighborhood. And that the people in the neighborhood are trying to maintain it as the historic importance of the neighborhood.
And Rhea, what about you?
I would want anybody to just take the legacy and the true foundation of what Shiloh is. And I hope that we've been able to not only, educate people on the legacy, but also I hope that they can recognize how that's tied into what we're going through today, as far as, revitalization versus gentrification, and why these conversations are so important that intersect generations. So I hope that everybody just kind of leaves here a little more educated, a little more aware of the spaces that we inhabit and subsequently you're moving into. So that would be my main takeaway that I would want people to take away.
And I'll say, Trevor, now that you wrap this up, I'll say the one thing that continues to show up in this conversation is that a neighborhood is a group of houses, a community is a group of people. And if we enjoy the legacy of Shiloh and we want to preserve the legacy of Shiloh, then we have to also give agency and autonomy, love and respect to the Black people that you see who don't live in Shiloh. Like, the legacy of Shiloh is the legacy of Black people. And so you can do your part by ensuring that the little Black girl in your classroom or walking down the street from you feels seen, heard, and validated, and that she feels respected, loved, and supported. And then she can go off and she can move to Arkansas and build her own Shiloh.
I want to thank you all so much for participating tonight. We've got a lot of congratulations in the chat, and I think I speak for everybody when I say fantastic job. I think we're probably all, if we're attending the program, we're probably all of a similar mind, and I don't think you can come away with any doubt that history matters, and it's not just the formalized written history, that you find in a monograph somewhere. It's the stuff that doesn't become famous. It's the history of people and communities. I think that's very important. I want to give you all just a second. Tell us about what you've got going on, and tell us where we can find your work and find out more about what you're doing.
Well, right now, I neglected to mention in my presentation one of the things that, maybe I did. The Shiloh, a committee of the Shiloh AME Zion Church, along with Diane Zimmerman, a historian in Biltmore Forest. This committee is working on trying to get the Shiloh Church on the list of historic places. Right now, the application is being written. Hopefully, it will be submitted by the end of the month. So that's one place in Shiloh we want to maintain. I'm also, as I thought more about for this presentation and throughout the years, I'm also interested in finding out more of the life stories of some of the people who were instrumental in leading Shiloh during what I call the middle years in the 20s, and particularly Lucius Williams and some of the men and the women in the Shiloh Community League. So that's pretty much it right now for me.
All right. What about you, Rhea? I'm curious, where can we find your book?
So my book is entitled Lost in the Game, The Road to Self-Discovery. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And it's actually a couple of people from the Asheville Community Theater on the call tonight. I just signed a new production deal with them, an exclusive production deal to develop some new stage plays and original work for the next year. So I'm super, super excited about that. They are amazing to work with. They're beautiful people. I'm just excited to get to work with them and cultivate more stories to bring here to Asheville and use those resources. And I was able to spur a young and gifted internship out of the production deal for youth of color to be hands-on and have a hands-on experience through the protocol and through all of the production. So they get to see what it takes for a play to leave the page and get to the stage and have a hands-on approach with that. So that's what I'll be working on for the next year. So everybody can kind of tune in and see what spurs out of that.
That's fantastic news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'll be sure to share in the email I send out to everybody more about your film and how they can contribute to that as well. What about yourself, Jefferson? What's going on with Jawbreaking?
We're just working away, Lord. We run a content platform, so you can catch some of my writing on our website, which is jawbreaking.xyz. And we're working on our marketing agency and making sure that other businesses that want to tell stories and hold space for these sort of conversations have a safe place to go to. So all the vibes.
Congratulations and good luck to you. I want to conclude. I want to take just a second to make a little shameless plug for the Historical Association. Let me share my screen with you right fast. So if you enjoyed tonight's film, we have a lot more coming up for you. We have our Lit Cafe series, and actually our very own director, Ann Chesky Smith, will present her new book on probably Asheville's most famous murder at the end of this month on Zoom. And we have another Lit Cafe coming up. Peter Barr, one of our Thomas Wolfe Memorial Literary Award nominees for this year, presents his new book. And if you're into paddling or anything outdoors, I'm leading this paddle on the French Broad in September. Also, skip ahead and tell you there's a few more things going on, but our October programming centers on labor history in Western North Carolina. And so we have these two events, and we also have an upcoming event not listed yet on the Marion Mill Massacre. And to kind of tie this back into tonight's presentation, Anita mentioned the Rosenwald schools. And so for next February, we hope to discuss Black schools in Western North Carolina. We're actually going to take a tour in February of that Rosenwald school in Mars Hill. It's not posted yet, but keep an eye on our events page to see more about that. It'll be up in a few months at least. Again, I just want to thank all of our panelists and our special moderator tonight. Fantastic job, everybody. Like I said, I'll send everybody the link to the recording within a few days when that's processed. I'll also send you a survey if you want to tell us a little bit more about your experience and anything you liked. So thank you all again. I'll bid everybody a good night.
Good night.
Night, everybody.
Good night.